welcome to another episode of Surroundscapes. In this episode, we're talking about a partner spotlight, and actually it's a partner that we also had on last series because there's been some really exciting developments. So I'd like to welcome once again Omer Brookstein from Xyte.
Hey, Graeme, thank you so much. It's a pleasure joining you today.
Thanks for coming back on. So last series, we had an episode with you talking about remote control and monitoring. And, I felt that Xyte, I still do feel that Xyte had really answered a question that the industry needed answering, which was a secure, fully featured monitoring system that went across manufacturers. So it wasn't confined to one manufacturer. Mm-hmm. So I felt that was an important functionality that needed answering. It's certainly been useful to us at Bluesound Pro, and we have hopefully some deployments that will really feature it in some very large deployments. But you didn't stop there. And just before Infocom, you talked to me about a new initiative called Open AV, and we were delighted to be a launch partner with you with Open AV. So I'd like you to talk about what that is, because I think that answers another thing that the industry needed.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe take a step back. Graeme, you and I have been in this industry for so many years, right? We've met at the early days of even Bion 20-some years ago. And I've always, still do obviously, love this industry. But I started feeling a little bit more and more frustrated in a way with the requirements and the friction we put on our customers and even our channel partners, system integrators, when they come to better integrate and better orchestrate and monitor devices through the cloud. Because unlike IT industries, we don't do a very good job as an industry having standards and open APIs and easy and simple and well-documented ways to integrate between devices and platforms. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, when you look at all the modern applications out there, and I'm sure we'll talk about AI in a couple of minutes as well, but even just the regular SaaS applications out there, if you're using whatever, Salesforce, if you're using Microsoft Teams Share, whatever it is, all those applications and all those modern services and AI agents, they all live in the cloud. And our devices, they're still on-prem on the local network, and there's no way to reach to those devices in a very simple way or simple method. So we joined with a couple of companies. Bluesound Professional, obviously, were one of the early ones to join, but also companies like Sony, Panasonic, Legrand, and others, to found what we're now establishing an association, by the way, and recent joiners also include Adobe, Intel, and some other very large names, and to create more openness in the industry and make it easier for end customer system integrators, because we hear that very often from them, to integrate one platform, one solution to the other solution. And the model we're looking at, is the model of software as a service. I always say that you can go to Microsoft Teams and with a click of a button, integrate to Salesforce, or with a click of a button, integrate into ServiceNow. And no one at Microsoft is telling you, hey, you know what, we're going to block those APIs, we're going to put it behind some payment wall or whatever it is, because we compete on some level with some other company out there. Yet in the audio video, you have to almost bag together the APIs. You have to talk to someone who knows someone who will send you some PDF that is outdated for 2 years ago, and you have to try and stitch things together. And I see a reality where if I want to automatically get alerts, for example, from Bluesound Pro players into my Salesforce or my ServiceNow ticketing system, if I want to be able to direct in the corporate world, direct teams from one meeting space to another meeting space because some device is offline, I want to see those platforms, those devices, almost natively and very, very easily talk to each other. Now, it does not mean they have to speak the exact same language, but they have to use the same framework and the same concept of openness. And we're happy to integrate with other platforms. And that's really the change we're trying to make in the industry.
Yeah, that's a great thing for you to be doing. So it has been a long frustration of mine that in our industry, we do have such a hard time establishing standards and talking to each other. So for a long time in the media layer, we've had various standards. So there's been, there was EtherSound, there was CobraNet, now there's AVB, there's Dante, there's QLAN, there's Ravenna, there's WheatNet, and there's to some extent AES-67 tying some of those together. Mm-hmm. But we as an industry, the AV industry or the audio industry, and that mainly in that part, have problems even deciding what media layer we're going to talk, what common language we're going to talk in terms of media, let alone control. And control is the kind of next step above that. And there have been some initiatives in the industry. I remember the Open Control Alliance a few years ago to try and get some sort of uniformity around this. But this really seems to be a really concerted effort for those of us manufacturers, and we at Bluesound Professional really do believe in openness and sharing and not being secretive. So we already have our API document, as you mentioned, available online, and we do try and keep it updated, but it is available online and readily available. But this is the next level again, where it can be hosted in the cloud. How do you see? You mentioned some integrations with, for example, Salesforce or something like that. But do you see developers coming in and using those APIs, say from our hardware, and let's just say BrightSign digital signage or something like that, to build the connective glue and be able to offer solutions there? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, 100%. So first of all, one of the most exciting things that after the announcement just before InfoComm, we get constant queries and people reaching out to us, and the majority of the people are end customers. I think their pain is the biggest, and system integrators and developer in the industry, and they constantly ask us, well, what's the next step? And we're going to communicate it later in August, but what's the next step? How we can leverage that? So I think definitely there's a great pull from the industry. As I mentioned before, there's some really great device manufacturers and technology vendors, it doesn't have to be physical device manufacturers, joining that association and help promoting and pushing that. And one more thing is, often people think that we're trying to create a common language, that all devices out there, all cloud application out there will speak the same language. And we'll talk about AI and MCP, and maybe that's a solution for that, but that's really not what we're trying to do. I think it's going to be, there's too many manufacturers, too many brands, too many devices. It is going to fail. But what we're trying to do is for everybody to speak a language. And when everybody speaks a language that we can all understand the different languages, that's when those developers you mentioned can click a button and immediately connect to the Bluesound Professional API, and then click another button and immediately authenticate and connect to the Panasonic API, and then immediately connect to Xyte and immediately stitch all of that to whatever their digital signage or app space or room scheduling, whatever it is, and create an integrated solution, which once again, that's the second nature of every SaaS application. You would never choose whatever Salesforce over other CRM if it's going to be a siloed solution that you cannot integrate to other platform. And remote management and monitoring or device orchestration in the cloud is really the most basic application. I talked to one of our largest customers yesterday, and he said, look, I have different type of hardware running my unified collaboration. But yet, when one of my users walks into the room, they always see the Microsoft Teams, in his case, interface. So it's make it easy for them to use every room, regardless of their specific hardware. I want to do the same thing in the cloud. So my IT team can see all of the devices from the same single interface. And it can be Xyte, it can be any other monitoring in the cloud. Whatever the customer choose, we have to let them choose their solution, but we have to make sure that we all speak and play nicely together. And maybe one last more, when you think about it, this is how the industry started, right? On buy-up DSPs for years, there was an RS-232 port that you connect to whatever, across to another control system. And you took 5 remote systems, into one touch panel, right? That was 20, 30 years ago, right? All we're saying is that take the same RS-232 port, and they each have their own different protocols, right? And just put that in the cloud, so anyone can connect and integrate with your devices, your solution, your product.
That makes a ton of sense. And I remember when you first came to me, my first question was, well, do our APIs have to be formatted in a particular way? And you said, no, not at all. They just have to be public. You just have to be okay with having them out in the public. And that then made a ton of sense. I did at Infocom talk to a few other manufacturers. Some of them were very behind it. A couple of them hadn't hadn't chosen to implement it. Have you had significant concerns from manufacturers? And if so, what have those been?
I think the number one concern we've seen from some of the largest, many of them are APIC manufacturers, is about the governance. And really the way we chose to start this initiative today is very different than other associations or alliances in the industry. When you look at the other alliances, and you mentioned a few of them before, they're usually backed by one chip manufacturer with maybe some partners to support it. And in the case of OpenAV Cloud, it's really started as an initiative by, once again, Legrand, Brightsign, Shure, Sony, Panasonic, and Xyte. And the idea was once again to start that motion and get more brands to agree to the concept. And I'm very happy to get all the brands we spoke to completely agree to the idea, and everybody understand that this is an integrated system. It's never just only your device that the customer is using, and so on. And the objection we've seen is that, okay, guys, you first need to incorporate an association and put more governance in place, which I fully agree and fully accept and understand. And then we'll be happy to join. And that's exactly what we're working on today. We're at the last stages of hiring a legal partner to help us incorporate an association. Once again, we'll have more information shared with the industry by end of August. I think that's the number one objection. I don't think we ever got anyone saying, I don't believe in that. It's the other way around. Everyone says, we fully understand, we fully believe, there's some processes and so on, and we'll see more and more of them joining.
Yeah, that's a good point you make about, a lot of the initiatives in the past have revolved around a manufacturer, or in some cases a small group of manufacturers. And I could say the same thing about monitoring and control. A lot of that has revolved around a manufacturer, and so you've done for interconnectivity on an API level what you've done for monitoring and control. It's interesting that, but over the years I've been part of a number of panels and given presentations. People have asked about the role of the AV industry in IoT, the Internet of Things. And I think even to ask that question fundamentally is a misunderstanding of what we do. Because if you think of the Internet of Things being machines talking to other machines without human intervention at its most basic level, that's exactly what we've been doing for years. Audio manufacturers have been using sensor input in order to do things like feedback elimination or ambient noise control or acoustic echo cancelling or any of the other adaptive algorithms. It is literally what what the AV industry does. So to ask, how can AV be a part of the Internet of Things? It's like, no, you're misunderstanding. It is. I mean, it literally at its core is. And it has been frustrating to me. I was very involved in the Avenue Alliance in AVB and the idea of IEEE standards at a media layer, which we as an industry have chosen not to fully embrace yet. I hope one day we will. I think it's a sign of maturity for an industry to go to truly open standards rather than proprietary standards. In fact, I was at a TED conference probably a decade ago, I suppose. And Tony Fadell, the guy, the iPhone designer that then launched the Nest thermostat company, and we were chatting. I knew him through TED, and And he was saying, how's it going? And I was saying, oh, we're having this struggle. And he said, let me guess. There's a struggle between proprietary standards and open standards. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what we're going through. And he said, don't worry. It's just a question of maturity. The open standards will win. It's just when the open standards win. And so I'm delighted to see that you're enabling manufacturers to talk to each other. You're enabling developers to make that connective glue between manufacturers. And how do you see OpenAV developing from here?
So maybe before I get to OpenAV, I completely agree. Maybe just 2 comments on that. The first one is the new term I've recently heard is AIoT, and we've combined AI and IoT, obviously, right? That you get more intelligent to the devices, and you kind of move from Internet of Things into Intelligent of Things, and it's get only way more interesting. And I completely agree with you. AV was IoT before anyone knew it's called IoT, right? And it's just another kind of segment of that. And you're absolutely right about the maturity and the standard. And the example, I always like to use is that, look, the audio video is a large market. It's still, to some extent, a niche market. And when you look at the IT and the Ethernet, right, the only way that enabled the Ethernet market to become and the IT become that large is because we have Ethernet as a standard, right? And Cisco and HP and Juniper, they compete with each other on features and other things, but eventually they all share the same bits among them. And we all compete in the industry, and competition is great. It pushes us forward, but we first have to make sure there's an industry to compete in, right? And if we all stick to our proprietary things and lock things down and try to lock our customers to our own ecosystem and so on, our customers will get more and more disappointed with the industry, and they will find other solutions. I think the example to that is, Zoom and Microsoft Teams taking the large MCU and the video conference industry, because for years you could not make a call from a Polycom system to a Cisco system, right? And then a software company did what they know to do best and created a standard, right? It's not perfect. There's some issues there, obviously, but they took the market and they created a much, much, much bigger market. So I think that's the opportunity, and that's why I'm so excited about that. On one hand, while I'm so, worried in a way about the future of industry if we fail to make this transformation. And I think I shared that with many of the other members of the OpenAV. And to your question about OpenAV, so what we do now, we start subcommittees, right? And there's a marketing subcommittee or go-to-market subcommittee. There's a community subcommittee where we work with, and Petra from Panasonic, she's leading that, working with the system integrators, the developers, the consultant in our industry, and so on. And we have a technical subcommittee that is led by Sam Sabat, CTO of Shure, to start. And once again, we don't want to force anyone, definitely, and we don't want to sort of get to a standard, same language, the same protocol, but put the best practices in place. The other thing we also working on with some leading consultants in the industry is publishing what we call a temporary name, an OpenAV certified device proposal or a clause for RFPs and RFQs, an OpenAV cloud platform like Xyte, like the AppSpace, Utelogy, and others, to help consultants and system integrators and customers specify devices that support the bare minimum and maybe some level of openness and APIs. And I can tell you from the conversation I had with a procurement manager of a very, very, very large American enterprise, that the reason why, from a procurement management perspective, not the IT, not the CIO, why she's looking for that is to ensure kind of the longevity or the investment she puts in her enterprise system. Because today, let's say I have 5,000 meeting spaces, and today company A makes the best sound bars for those meeting spaces. So I'm going to buy 1,000 for my 1,000 meeting spaces. But in 2 years from now, there'll be another company. I'll buy another 1,000. And I will always have different generation and different kind of hardware. But I need to be able for those devices to communicate and to be integrated together, because I don't want to rip and replace all of my gear, all of my hardware every few years when I just add or change a subset of it. So it is absolutely crucial for the enterprise customers or any other large customers. That's what they're looking for. They want us to speak IT. They want us to be open. They want us to be simple to integrate. They're tired from all the custom protocols, and we're going to do that. We're going to do that with the technical subcommittee. We're going to do it with the customers and consultant advisory board that we're starting.
Excellent, excellent. So, a couple of things you said there. You mentioned video conferencing and Cisco codecs and Polycom codecs and that sort of thing. And what actually happened a lot of the time was you could get the base functionality. If they're using H323 or whatever, and they'd SIP to negotiate that sort of stuff. But what you couldn't get was the enhanced functionality, the kind of picture-in-picture and remote PTZ and that sort of stuff. And we have that same thing now with AES-67, which is a basic translation language, but you don't have device discovery and enumeration. You don't necessarily have the same precision time clock. And so it's the same sort of thing. It's a base level kind of, yes, we can talk at a basic level, but we can't get all the good stuff on top of that, because that requires more uniformity. And it was interesting being on the various Avenue working groups, that our industry thought it was a VHS Betamax thing between AVB and Dante, that one would survive and the other one would go away. What I don't think very many people realized is we were just one of the industries involved in AVB. So there were four main industries. There was the AV industry, there was the consumer electronics industry, there was the automotive industry, and there was the bigger kind of industrial process control, financial transaction side of it all. And the other three parts just went on and did it, such that probably your car has AVB in it. Many industrial automation systems have AVB as their backbone. So it didn't go away. We just were scared to adopt it, basically, which to me was really, really sad, because we had an early seat at the table. And you also mentioned the size of the industry. And for our viewers, you might know this, and I'm going to ask you the question. So how big do you think the global music industry is? So by that, I mean recording, live sound, that sort of thing.
I'm just guessing now. Must be very large industry. $1 trillion, multi-trillion dollar. It must be a very large industry.
No, it's much smaller.
No, really?
Much smaller. It's
with all the headset and the speakers and the music services and the recording
I'm
studios.
talking about the music business. So recording business, the live touring business, not consumer electronics, just the act of recording music or performing music. And it's
sub 100 billion, I would guess.
Yeah, that's actually right. It's just over 60 billion, of which recording is about 30 billion, with streaming being about 19 billion of that. And then various elements of the live sound industry, touring, kind of ticket receipts and that sort of thing, being the other half of it. How big do you think the Pro AV industry is?
I think the Pro AV is estimated at around 306, I think, about a year ago, 2 years ago, and with a 5-point-something% growth year over year. That includes, I believe, the music industry that you included part of that, and live concert and some other sub-industries within that. But that the numbers I'm familiar with.
Yeah, then you're right. It's around about 300 billion. So about 5 times the size of the music industry. And it doesn't include, it includes the equipment that goes on tours, but what it doesn't include is the ticket sales and the kind of recording studio revenue and streaming service revenue. None of that comes into the 300. That's in the 60 billion. And what most people have no idea is that our Pro AV industry, whilst very small in comparison to the IT industry, is 5 times the size of the music industry. So we really do need to get this right. I mean, yes, it's not as big as the IT industry, but it is a really significantly sized industry. And we need to grow up, and we need to have standards, and we need to have interoperability. We need to have transparency. So you mentioned a term, and you very often do this to me, that I hadn't heard before, which is AIoT, which leads into a conversation about AI and Xyte and AI. Unless you have any comment on what I've just said, but start talking about AI.
I mean, I'll be happy to talk about AI. We can go for hours, but I'd say just one comment is that I don't think people realize how big and how significant the audio video industry is. And Xyte is a VC-backed company, and I have to go pitch those investors. And for some of them, hearing about even the term Pro AV is, in many cases, their first time. And what I'm telling them is that audio video is everywhere, right? It's every retail store, every digital signage, every corporate office, every UC Zoom, Microsoft Teams room, every quick service restaurant or coffee place, every bus stop today. There's audio video there, right? And once you understand that scale, and we have an Xyte today, all the way from corporates to house of worship to universities and school and zoos, and many other places that are using Xyte to manage and monitor devices globally. So even for me, being in this industry for so many years, it's just mind blowing when I actually look at that and look at the numbers. And to your point about AI, personally, I find AI, absolutely fascinating. And you said something before about Xyte being a monitoring tool, and when I met customers at Infocom, I always told them that from the customer perspective, the system integrator, there's also a dedicated interface for OEM like Bluesound. But from the customer perspective, you look at that and it seems like in device monitoring, orchestration, asset management, so on. But it's really just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's the entire iceberg beneath the sea level that you don't see. And that's what Xyte really is. And I strongly believe that, with AI now, we can take one of two approaches. The first one, which is the most immediate one, and we did it as well, you add some AI capabilities and features, and you add an MCP, as you and I discussed before, and maybe you add an agentic AI into the platform, and that's great, and that's what people expect. But they'll be missing the opportunity, because I think today we have to really completely rethink everything that we do with AI. And in some cases, the answer might say, what, we should keep the old-fashioned way to do the same thing. But in some other cases, that's going to completely change the way we do things, right? So, everything is changing. I barely go to Google anymore, right? I ask ChatGPT if they have some recommendation for me. Soon enough, I'll move away from my current browser to one of the new AI-powered browsers. All of my assets I developed for my company and our investors, I do with AI. And I think when it comes to IoT as well, there are some things that are absolutely very important. First of all, I think from device manufacturer's perspective, it creates a great opportunity. Device manufacturer has been facing some great challenges in the last years. Devices in many markets, not all of them, being commoditized, margins getting harder and harder. And AI gives a great opportunity to implement advanced capabilities that can be charged with a different business model in the same way, Tesla charged for the full self-driving. So that's a great opportunity for OEM, for device manufacturers to leverage AI and give better services to their customers. I also think that something that is very incredibly important for AI is context, because if you just look at one device and you do some AI at the edge of that device, the only context it gets is the device itself. But the real magic or the real value will come from where you kind of merge multiple devices and get the context of a meeting space, a context of a retail store, right? And then you can merge that with the data coming from other devices in the cloud, and you can get much more valuable outcomes and insights to the end customer. So, the most simple example, if one of my devices is offline, maybe there's an issue with the device, but if two of them is offline, maybe there's an issue with the switch at the floor, right? So those are very basic stuff, and we can automate them using AI. And the other thing which I find increasingly interesting is semantic context, because what we do at Xyte today, I was asked by a potential investor today, so you're an IoT platform. I said, no, we're not an IoT platform. We're a business platform. We have a business outcome and value proposition to our customers sitting on top of a very robust connectivity layer. But what we do, we take all the data from the devices, right? And the telemetry, the logs, it's multimodal kind of data, but we fuse it with the business value chain, right? We better understand how my devices and customers are using the devices out in the wild. And once you start to fuse that, that's where the real value will start to show for device manufacturers like Bluesound Professional and for the enterprise customers. And this is the kind of thing that happened, in that under the sea level part of the iceberg, right? That's where the real magic happens. And I strongly believe that, 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, it was a competitive advantage to have your devices managed in the cloud. And then the industry followed, and everybody needed to support their customers with that. And we see some of the Xyte customers simply winning more business because they have these capabilities, but other catching up. And what will be the next competitive advantage for everybody is getting visibility to the data and being able to take data-driven, actions and being able to better service and support and sell to your customers after you have real concrete data and you're not just guessing. And I think that's fascinating. And I think the next few years is going to be, absolutely amazing. And everything that we do today with Xyte, when we come to InfoComm 2026 and beyond that, I think it's going to be absolutely mind-blowing what people will see. And it will make them look at InfoComm 2025. And that was boring, right? And then the last thing is that just the pace in which the technology advance is just insane, right? So the things we do today for our customers, they're outdated a month later, right? And it's also true for device manufacturers. So many device manufacturers in the industry have different AI models. It could be a camera tracking, a microphone beam, an audio, and whatever. But without the right platform to back it, the second you put this device in the field, it's already outdated because the AI models have improved drastically, right? And there's no way to train them and push the new models to the edge devices. So I think it's going to completely change the way we work with devices, our device manufacturers, our enterprise customers, and everything in between. And I can't wait to see how it's going to impact our industry.
That's fascinating. So as we begin to talk about AI, I mean, I have long been concerned about some of the foundational stuff around dataset biases, for example, around TDM laws, text and data mining laws, the fact that the US and the UK, for example, don't have TDM laws. And in fact, both countries are moving away from that, which I feel is pretty dangerous, particularly on the creative side of our industry, where the data that people are scraping is the livelihood of those creators. Some friends, Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst, have done a wonderful project in the Serpentine Gallery in London called The Call, where they've been recording choirs and feeding them into an AI model. It's just brilliant. But the exhibition catalog for that, the provocative title is "All Media is Training Data," and so that's all music, that's all video content. And UCC, that our industry is often fixated about, is the only bit of our industry where we create in real time our own content. All the rest of it, we interface with creators, audio creators, musicians, video creators, even digital signage requires creators. And even though Zuckerberg and Daniel Ek insist on calling it content, I love calling it art and music, and because that's actually what it is. So we've got some foundational questions, as you mentioned, around governance, around laws. I am, like you, hugely excited about AI. I'm also scared about AI, but I think with any absolute change, there comes that kind of fear and excitement at the same time. I'm also interested in you talking about AI as a route of helping the industry get away from commoditization. And that's interesting to me with, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the industries going down a UCC path, and that part of the industry is getting more and more commoditized. And it has the potential of shifting from the AV industry to the IT industry, because there's very little kind of special sauce that we can offer, hanging a soundbar and a display. And my feeling is that all the most interesting work in the workspace is actually outside the meeting room at the moment, in the stuff we're doing with furniture companies on activity-based working, with executive briefing rooms, experience centers, lobbies, that sort of thing, experiential design. However, even I was still at BIAM, so that must have been 2016, nearly 10 years ago. I was talking to people about emotion tracking, sentiment tracking. And at that point, where you can go in and look at a meeting room and not just say, how many people were in the meeting room? Did you book a 20-person meeting room for a meeting with only 4 people, and you booked the wrong meeting room, which happens a lot? But was it a happy meeting? Was it a meeting in which every participant was empowered, whether remote or local? That's when excitement comes back into the meeting room space, because you can truly add new functionality, useful functionality, kind of scary functionality, sentiment tracking, emotion tracking. But it's interesting because, as you say, you move the charging model from which literally we have been thinking about for at least 20 years now. How do we move from a one-off sale of hardware to a hybrid sale of software, of services, and such as the ones you're offering? In 2011, I think it was, I had a great discussion with Jeff Kowalski, the CTO of Autodesk, about their journey from selling CDs in a box to selling SaaS to selling time on their servers, and how that worked, and the various challenges. So do you have any comment on any of that? Because I have another question to ask.
I have tons of comments, I guess. I think that, well, first of all, kind of not to scare all the artists in the audience, I saw a nice interview with one of the best and well-known Israeli guitar players, and actually played him 3 tracks. Some of them were generated using AI, and they asked him which one is AI generated. And he immediately spotted all of them AI generated. He just said they don't have the soul that a true guitar player will put on playing. And I'm not saying it's not going to improve. And for someone like me, they all sounded great, right? And I couldn't spot them, obviously. But I think there's a lot of things that still will not be able to be replaced by a machine or by an AI agent, that a human being will be the only one being able to do. And I think the saying is going, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you're going to be replaced maybe by someone better using AI to do its job. So it's up to us to use the new tools in the same way it's, whatever, 30 years ago or more, the internet started, right? And before that, you used to send like regular postmail. Now you're sending emails, and we all got used to that and need to help us to do more in less time. The same thing will happen with AI. And yes, I completely agree. I think the industry will move, every industry, every device manufacturer will eventually move to services. And when you think about it, Bluesound speakers, this iPhone, right? All those devices are becoming enabler to more advanced services. And when you focus on the service, and digital signage is another great example, right? No one wants to buy the display. And don't get me wrong, Graeme, but no one wants to buy the speaker or the amplifier. They want to buy the music, right? And if you position it differently, and if you give maybe the AI creation services, and you play the music, and you take care completely for all the licensing and everything for the customer, then instead of paying for the box for the speakers one time, I'm just going to subscribe to the service, right? And I think it makes perfect sense. Maybe not every industry, but like you said about Autodesk and Adobe and Microsoft, it took time, for some of them 20 years, right? And it's not an easy one to transition, but eventually it makes tons of sense to do that.
Yeah, and interestingly, we talk about our customers won't accept software as a sale. But as you mentioned, the end customer already is paying software as a service with their O365 cloud or their Adobe Creative Cloud or their ERP or their CRM or any of the other BI tools that they use. And interestingly, this pushback against things. If I look at music as a musician, there was pushback when we went from acoustic instruments and started to bring electric instruments in the late 50s. Then computer instruments in, and I'm a drummer, so some of my drummer friends said I was killing drummers back in the 80s when I was programming Lindrums and the original drum machines. And I said to them, to your guitarist point, you have to actually be a drummer to program these properly. Yeah. Otherwise, it doesn't sound convincing. And then we moved to sampling, and people were worried again that was going to kill our industry. And now we're moving through AI to timbre transfer programs and to AI-generated stuff. And there is a huge dark side to this. A lot of what Spotify are doing with perfect fit content, and there's a whole rabbit hole we could go down around that, because what you say is true. Your guitarist friend can tell the difference, but you can't. And if the consumers can't, then the consumers will buy what would they don't care. So it's not other musicians you have to fool, it's the consumers you have to fool. But a few months ago, well, actually quite a few months ago, just after ISE, you mentioned MCP to me, and you were the first person to mention MCP, so Model Context Protocol. And I became convinced that within the year, everyone would be talking about MCP. And still, the huge majority of people who I talk to about MCP have never heard of it. Some of them, even when I explain it to them, kind of don't really get it. Others, their minds are literally blown. So I'd like you to give us a little primer on MCP.
Sure. And once again, the pace is just insane. I think MCP was kind of announced or released by Anthropic and adopted by OpenAI around March, maybe months earlier. And then about less than a month later, Google announced A2A, which is agent to agent. And it just, it's been just a month, right? And it made MCP, it looks like, yesterday's newspaper pretty much, and just old news. But I think MCP is, it's absolutely amazing. And essentially what agentic AI, Anthropic and OpenAI and other adopting that are trying to solve is the same challenge that we have in the industry that we talked about, being able to integrate things together, but at the scale of the internet. And at the scale of the internet, you cannot just talk to all the internet web services out there and try them to convince to join, open something web and agree on something. So if you want, at a very, just a very simple example, if today you can use ChatGPT to maybe recommend, we're looking to travel to Costa Rica, so maybe recommend a trip in Costa Rica for you. But what you'd like to do with agentic AI and AI teammates, which is a more common term in the enterprise environment maybe, is for them to also be able to take actions. And so instead of to do that, OpenAI would need to integrate to Booking.com API. API is the application programming interface, how technology talk to each other, right? And then they have to develop an API to United.com, but maybe you're flying Air whatever, Elal, or whatever, they have to another API, and all those APIs are different. So what MCP does, it's almost like an abstraction layer on top of those API. And if I have any kind of service, I'll just spin up my MCP server. And by the way, even the way to do MCP is that it's built using AI. It's looking at the API's documentation and then understand which API call can do and does. And then every AI agent that supports MCP can talk to that translation layer or abstraction layer to any service in the internet. And this is just mind-blowing, right? And why is it important for us or for the audio video industry? Because we would like to do the same thing, right? And what you start seeing, or we start seeing today, is enterprise customers implementing more technology across the organization, and they cannot keep scaling their help desk team. This is just one example, right? They need to become more efficient across the board. And becoming more efficient means they need to adopt more technology and more AI teammates to do the same or growing scale of their job. And if I'm running a help desk team, instead of hiring 5 more help desk engineers, I'll just go to Salesforce Agentforce, ServiceNow AI agents, and I'll look for ways to work with them, those autonomous agents, to manage, monitor, support my users, and so on. But for them to be able to autonomously take actions, they need a way to communicate with the different services. And in the case of Xyte, communicate with the physical devices. So I'll give you an example. Maybe one of my users in my corporate goes on his Microsoft Team chat or Slack chat and just open a chat with an AI help desk agent. Say, hey, the music doesn't play in the whatever in the main lobby, right? And then the agentic AI can communicate directly with the player, get the data, get the telemetry, and push a reboot command if needed to restart the system or maybe turn the volume up or whatever it is. The way for the agent to better understand what's the problem, analyze it, and take action is using MCP, which is this translation layer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that came, as a hardware manufacturer, that was the first thing I thought about. That you talked about using AI for your searching now for Google, using AI for browsing, AI-based browser. My thought immediately went to AI for control. So people were talking about moving to a single pane of glass, but that goes away. You don't need a pane of glass anymore. You just literally talk into whatever device, your phone, we're using, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and say, I'd like to configure my boardroom for a video conference with New York or something with these people. And it's done. And the whole control layer of the industry goes away. And the stuff you were talking about there, the diagnostic stuff, the help desk stuff, the integration with the non-hardware based parts of our industry, it's like truly mind-blowing. And to me, that's the third thing within 5-6 years that Xyte is doing. One, give us control and monitoring, make it an open architecture. 2, allow us to communicate at a control layer, so glue our products together better. 3, give us this trusted interface with agentic AIs or AI teammates, as you say, and solve that problem for us, a problem that most people don't even know they have yet. And that's just mind-blowing to me that I think Bluesound Pro in 5 or 6 years have answered one problem the industry had, which was streaming music in commercial spaces. We were the first, we're still the only ones. We solved a problem. And to me, that's great. There's lots of companies that just make another thing that lots of other companies make, like a loudspeaker or an amplifier or whatever. They don't solve a unique problem. I felt we were doing pretty well to solve one. You've solved 3 in the same time frame, because our 2 companies have been going to about the same time. That's amazing. Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, first of all, thank you for the compliment. I really appreciate that. I think that, by the way, I think it comes down to, and that's one of the biggest challenges as well, of software and hardware. And part of the reason why we started Xyte, because I realized at my time at Crestron, is that device manufacturer does an excellent job, especially in our industry, developing great hardware. But developing software requires very different skill set and very different pace, right? And we just could not release updates in the pace that the software industry require you to release them. And that's what we do with Xyte. And I don't know where exactly it's going to, but I'll give you another use case. I don't know if you're familiar with the term vibe coding, but vibe coding is essentially anyone can build any app today, right? And there is a great guy in Israel. He started his company sometime in September or October, I want to say, and about 6 months later, he sold it for $80 million 2 weeks. It's a vibe coding. Just to give you an idea, I mean, when you're looking at Xyte saying how fast we move, I look at him and say we move slow, right? But with vibe coding, and I encourage everybody listening to go to Base 44 and just try it out. It's part of Wix now, and there's Laravel and Bolt and some others. But with vibe, and I'll give you a nice story in a second. With vibe coding, think about vibe coding in the audio video, where you just go to, say Xyte as an example, but it can be any platform, and I just claim my different devices in my meeting space or my town hall or my boardroom, and I just have a blue speaker, and I have some DSP, and I have some touch panel, and I have some whatever control system, and I'll just type in, I want to have an interface that would allow me to control the input, the volume, and power of the system. And that will just magically build the interface for me, which will magically load it to the room touch panel. I'll let you control it from the cloud, and I'll do that in 20 seconds, right? And I don't have to draw touch panels any longer and do all the buttons and all of that. And just to give you an idea how powerful this is, Laravel, we just raised over, I want to say $100 million, $180 million, and over $1 billion valuation. They showed how with a simple prompt, they can build their own DocuSign. DocuSign, I think it's a $50 billion company, right? And within 15 minutes, they built a service that can compete with DocuSign. But what I found even more interesting is that another developer took another AI tool, and within, I think, 75 minutes, right, which you'll agree with me is nothing, built Laravel, an over $1 billion company in 75 minutes. So what happens, and what we can clearly see, and that's, by the way, another great benefit for hardware, I think, companies, is that the value of software constantly drops down. It's becoming easier and easier and easier to develop software. That's why many investors are shifting back to hardware. It is hard to do hardware. It's not harder to just copy and replicate that. It's a great benefit to be in today. And what happens is the value of software goes down, is the value of data and visibility constantly goes up. So all these dynamics completely change. And I think it's, once again, it's going to be fascinating to see where it's going to. And it's happening in a very, very, very fast pace.
It is. It's interesting because I have been very disappointed by the rate of change in our industry for actually a long time, but particularly since the pandemic. I go to every trade show and I look at, what's the meaningful change that's going on there, and you don't see a lot. The most meaningful change at ISE was the beginnings of e-ink coming into the digital signage market, and like Agile Display doing solar-powered e-ink displays that didn't need any connectivity, and then SP Grid to provide an engine for experiential design, to Unity and oh God, I've forgotten the name of the other one. Unity and the other one communicating with hardware, and Unreal Engine. That's the other one. And there's things happening at the edge. I thought the most interesting thing at Infocom was OpenAV, but I didn't hear a lot of people talking about it. And I wonder, you and I think about the speed of change. And I was going to bring up, it's kind of a folding back on itself thing. You talk about growing companies in a very short time. One of the ones that blew my mind was Johnny Ive starting a company IO in May 2024 and selling it to OpenAI for $6.5 billion earlier this year. It's like, wow, 0 to 6.5 billion in less than a year. It's unreal. And that's interesting because I'm super fascinated to know what that hardware device is going to look like. I mean, much as I love teenage engineering, Rabbit wasn't it.
Yep.
And I'm really fascinated to see what the hardware interface is going to look like. But, you said Infocom 2026 is going to look nothing like Infocom 2025. I mean, on one hand, I really, really, really hope you're right, because our industry desperately needs that. We desperately need to pick up the pace. But are you optimistic we will?
Well, first of all, when I said it before, I meant to Xyte. I can't speak of the name of the industry, and I do agree with you. Once again, it's part of the nature of a hardware-centric industry, is that it takes time to develop hardware. And with hardware, if something is not well designed, then you have a problem and you can just recall the devices. So you have to be very, very careful. With software, and specifically cloud software, we literally push updates and new capabilities to our cloud platform sometimes twice or three times a day. And we know that even if we break something, we can very, very quickly fix it. So we value pace and speed of innovation over making sure everything is bulletproof to begin with. So I think with Xyte, everything's going to be very, very different. And I think it's actually a pretty interesting, and I gotta say, very nice place to be in, where we're one of the very few software companies in a very hardware centric industry. And I think we really do, and you know that I've mentioned it before, this industry is very dear to my heart. And Xyte is horizontal. We have streetlight companies and we have security companies working on the platform, but we always, remain focused to where we came from, where I came from, to the audio video industry. And so I'm fascinated by that, and I'm very, happy to be that change agent in the industry. And there's so many things going on other than OpenAV. I think we published an AI that we've discussed. We're now working on some of the largest device service projects in the industry, and hopefully we'll be the one behind that. We're getting more and more vendors to join. We're building the ecosystem. We get more and more end customers. We're completely, once again, rethinking how we do everything. So to us, having kind of living between ISC and Infocom is a very slow pace. So we've added 2 cloud summits that we joined. We constantly communicated. We just had a webinar earlier this week. So we constantly communicate and constantly push updates to our customers. And I just, that's what, to be frankly honest, that's what kind of, gets me excited in the morning and getting to the office. I don't think that I could work in in a slower pace. I'll just be too bored, I guess. So I'm happy pushing forward. I'm happy bringing this innovation. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it doesn't succeed. That's part of the business. But I think it's all about speed and move fast. And it's true for everyone in the industry. We really have to move fast. It's true for system integrators. It's true for device manufacturers. We have to keep innovating and changing, because that's the world we live in today. It just changes very, very fast. And if you don't change, then you die. That's what I believe in.
So 2 last questions for you, really. One is, you talked about rolling out software updates 2 or 3 times a day. And, I can't remember whether it was Zuckerberg or Musk that coined the phrase move fast and break things.
Zuckerberg, yes. That was the first one.
I thought it was Zuckerberg, but I couldn't remember whether it was Zuckerberg or Musk. To some extent in our industry, that's a dangerous methodology. How are you going to protect against that? A lot of the installations we do, even at Bluesound Pro, we have stuff at the Senate. We've got deployments of tens of thousands of locations that even if you break it for a little while, it's a real problem. How are you going to guard against that?
Well, first of all, I think going back to Zuckerberg and Musk simply just breaks things, right?
Yeah,
Zuckerberg just move fast. But I think that, well, first of all, we just to be clear, right? We run all the automate tests all the time and make sure that everything we do is well deployed and well kind of reviewed by another developer before we push and so on. But I do think that even look at devices. If you, and we have some customer that has made some mistakes in the past, but if you put the wrong kind of chip or use not enough memory in your device, it's going to be impossible to fix that over time. But if you're talking about software updates, even to the devices, and if you have the platform to push software updates very, very quickly, then I think you can allow yourself to be, I'll just say, less conservative about that. And, for installation like the Senate, like you mentioned before, it's probably going to be, by the Senate IT team pushing that for first device first and then second device and so on. And some other customer will just get it overnight. And even if you break things and you do everything you can not to break things, if you have the mechanism in place to fix it promptly, I think, in many ways, and, if you handle it correctly, customers actually value that, right? And just look at iPhones. iPhones, they're critical devices for so many people. And Apple constantly push software updates, and in some cases, they break things. They don't break the complete device, but they break things and some functionality, and they immediately fix it. And this is, once again, this is just the world we all live in today. People have learned to accept it. And what's the alternative of not pushing any updates to the edge devices? Then they're outdated, a week or a month after they've been installed. So you have to find the right balance. It differs from one industry to another. I think speakers are very important, but maybe operation room medical device is more important. You'll be more careful there, but you have to find the right balance.
And I think some of the things that you said there really is to do with the trust that you place in the people that are doing it. So I'm an Apple user, and I just accept the push updates that they send. But it always used to be the case. I hadn't been a Windows user for ages, but the Windows user used to say, wait till at least Service Pack 2 before you go to anything. And so, I think a key to this with Xyte is to become that trusted provider. Yep. And it's interesting what you say about hardware and not building the ability to future-proof your hardware, putting too little memory in or something like that. Certainly that's true. And part of what we do is make service agnostic hardware so that you can change between music services and things, which is exactly for what you're talking about, future proofing. But I'm also really interested in the devices becoming more like edge devices. So I mentioned to you talking to Jeff Kowalski all those years ago, and with Revit particularly, and also with some music mixing software that I know about. And I think increasingly people will use cloud-based compute to do most of the compute. And you have kind of light engines at the endpoint. Now latency becomes an issue in some of our, certainly UCC and stuff. But if you think about a lot of the stuff we do where we're replaying music or replaying soundscapes, latency is not an issue at all. I mean, you can have a 5-minute latency as long as you have, kind of deterministic transmission of data. Doesn't matter what the latency is. So I actually think this whole way we're moving will kind of safeguard forward-thinking hardware manufacturers, because by making your device more and more of an edge device and pushing more and more of the functionality into the cloud, you actually protect yourself against being obsoleted hardware-wise. You just say, okay, I can't do it here, but I'll push it over there where you've got more or less infinite resources.
100%. I don't know if you can add an HDMI input on the cloud, but yes, for compute and storage and AI models, absolutely. In many cases, the cloud would just be, where you want to do those kind of calculations.
Yeah, a lot of the people, that are using, cloud-based compute at a large scale are doing kind of like low-resolution modeling locally, and then pushing to the cloud to do the high-resolution modeling where latency is not dependent. So you've got something you can deal with locally, but you want the high-resolution output, whatever it is, a Revit model or a high-resolution audio mix, or of hundreds of stems. You do that in the cloud. This has been fascinating. I love talking to you because you say I want to be a change agent in the industry, and I see you as that person, maybe uniquely. Honestly, I'm not just saying that because you're on here. And I trust Xyte to do the right thing. That's why we partnered with Xyte, and that's why I didn't think twice about getting involved with OpenAV. Is there anything before we finish that you'd like to say that we haven't mentioned so far?
No, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure, and I enjoy the conversation very much. And I like the visionary approach of the conversation and talking about what the future is holding. And no, I just think I see a very bright future for the industry. I think we have people are expecting us to step up, and I think we're doing a lot of things as an industry, and individual companies, and individual in the industry to do that. And I think, look, AI will not replace audio video, because once again, that's the way we interact with the world, and audio video will just be more and more popular among installations and customers, and more demanded. So I think there's a very bright future for our industry, and I'm very happy to take part of that. And I think we should all be proud of our industry.
Great. Well, thank you again. How do people find out both about Xyte and about OpenAV?
So OpenAV, it's openav.cloud. That's the domain, and all the information is there. We're running some updates. And Xyte is Xyte, xyte.io. People are always welcome to reach out on LinkedIn or by email, and always happy to jump on a call and see how we can help. Great.
Thank you so much, Omer. And for those of you at home, I say at home, you might not be at home, but for those of you listening and watching, you can always find Surroundscapes on your chosen podcast platform. A good way of finding it is either on YouTube and subscribe there, or on our own surroundscapes.bluesoundprofessional.com site. We release episodes every week, so please come back and see more.
Thank you so much, Graeme.